All right, coming in on the top 10 of the show, we have Scott Crow. Scott Crow is an international speaker, author, storyteller, activist, filmmaker, dad, and musician, just to name a few. For the last 2 decades, he has focused on diverse social political issues and explorations in creating and exercise a counterpower to capitalism. Scott's first book, Black Flags and Windmills, was critically acclaimed and hit NPR's top summer reads of 2015. And Scott was also in the electronic group Lesson 7, which is what we're here to talk to him about today. So Lesson 7 is a one-man electronic project, which at one point wasn't just a one-man project. But anyway, this has been Scott's mode of expression from the beginning, and it kind of lay dormant due to that long list of incredible things he's been up to at the beginning of this intro. But now he founded Emergency Heart Records, and has revisited his past and has been remixing and rewriting some of these original Lesson 7 tunes. Scott is releasing the Continuum of Time, which is a collection of these rewritten, remastered, re-edited Lesson 7 tunes, to be followed by 2 other remix albums, Memories of the Future, remixes /Red, which is going to come out in January 2023, and Memories of the Future remixes /Black to become released in March 2023. We're going to listen to a tune off Continuum of Time. This is Lesson 7 featuring Mark Pistol on guitar, and the tune is called Until December. Until December, Lesson 7, featuring Mark Pistol on the guitar. Very cool stuff. This is really interesting where this conversation goes, because electronic music has its place, and you don't really equate it to country music, but Scott's journey musically started from growing up in country music. And country music royalty, as far as country music's concerned, we're talking George Jones. His dad was the drummer to George Jones' band. Wild, right? Anyway, we're going to get into this conversation. Before we do that, make sure you check out Emergency Heart Records. They have a great lineup. I've talked to a few artists from that label, Sign and Mark Stewart. The name a few. We talk about Mark a lot. Mark Stewart from the Pop Group, and that dude's amazing. And anywho, so Emergency Heart Records is where you can get Continuum of Time, as well as a lot of other amazing music that is doing it for the real reason, not the real reason, is doing it for the pure reason. Is doing it to express themselves on a label of people also trying to express themselves. It's not too often you get artists on both ends. So Emergency Heart Records is a really cool dive into the world of creativity. Lastly, if you can rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on one of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Scott and being able to share that insight with you. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Scott Crow. I wanted to know if you have this concept, and it's concept backed by action with solidarity, not charity. How much of that kind of weaved its way into your reality through music?
100%. Music was a doorway for me to explore life and to explain things. Even as a child, I remember hearing stories, and it was oh, these stories actually mean something to me, even if I don't know who these people are or what these things are. They were just commonalities of things to explain situations that I was in that I didn't understand, because I grew up working class poor, and a lot of drug addiction and alcoholism ran throughout my family. My uncles and cousins were in and out of prisons and jail and stuff, and so anyway, so storytelling from songs was always a part of this. But when I became a musician, the collaborative nature of music, even though I didn't have this language for it. So understand that I'm explaining it now in retrospect, right? But I love the collaborative of working together with people for common goals. And then when I got real serious about music and started to do things, then I saw and through exposure to other bands that were very political, like first in punk music and then really through industrial music, I began to understand the power of politics crossing over in music, and so started to use that. And so this is where the solidarity and charity comes in, is that I realized that we could not only raise our voices to talk about issues and do things, but we could actually raise funds for these issues and things. And again, solidarity, not charity, didn't, like was not a concept in my head or anything, but these are the rudimentary things that just kind of have crossed over. I love collaborating with people. Like, I hate when people think that they're the smartest person in the room and they have it all figured out. I love the multi brains to figure stuff out. I mean, I ain't gonna lie. I'm a smart person, and like, but I'm no smarter than anybody else. But I want to hear what people are thinking, and like we work together when we collaborate on this stuff. And so that, like as the decades went on, and I left music and went into the political world a lot, that concept developed, in 2000, started in the early 2000s. So you're talking about, from the 80s until then. So it was a pretty good road to get there.
Yeah, yeah. That's well, I think that's a very insightful process to not like because it's like with music you're listening, right? And that's how you learn how to be better at that. And like that happens from hearing what's around you. That happens from taking bits of people's ideas and phrasings and finding out how you can convey that authentically through yourself. So to do that with like a philosophical approach is only like to come off and say the smartest guy in the room is always talking too much usually is the opposite, right? That guy is like not hearing
Exactly.
all these other
Yes.
ideas.
Yes.
And like,
yes.
I think that's such a cool, and in the long run, that's going to make you as an individual more adept for a plethora of situations because you already have all these different ideas coming from other places that you would have never came to because you heard multiple perspectives. And like that's such an important concept, and like that I think musically related that's in the genesis of it. And I think especially with like the electronic approach to music and the idea of like sampling in like there's a big strain of people in the music community that are like you're pushing buttons, but I think it's really similar to like a jazz musician who hears a phrase, plays it on a trumpet, transposes it to a different key. Or, you know what I mean? Like that process.
Exactly. Yes.
So like when did like as far as music and like as far as playing music, what did you start with? Did you start with like guitar? Did you start with like keys?
Oh no, I actually was a drummer. So
Yeah. Okay.
I'm from a. So let me back up again because everything has to have a starting point, right? It's like so I am from country music royalty. So my
Yeah.
dad was the drummer for George Jones.
No
He was one of the
way.
original Jones boys for in the 60s and 70s, and Tammy Wynette when they were married together, and then when they split sometime in the mid 70s, he went with Tammy. And so, but just know this: my dad was in prison almost as long as he was in the as the drummer for George Jones also. But through that, I got to meet a lot of people and doing and just doing that. And so my dad was a drummer, and so but he was also an alcoholic and a drug addict, and also angry and all these other things, and was a prone to violence and stuff like that. I'm not trying to make it a sad story, but I'm just saying like that
Yeah.
was real too. But he
Yeah.
gave me a drum kit when I was about 9 or 10, and then was a total asshole and show me how to play it. And it was a great early pearl inlaid Ludwig set from the 50s, and it was beautiful, but it was kind of beat up, and I loved it. And so in despite him, or in spite of him, I decided to learn to be a better drummer than he was. And so I was motivated.
Yeah.
But then I didn't do country music by that time, and by that, like I started playing and playing and playing, and by the time I was about 11 or 12, I was in heavy metal bands. And this is before this would be like 1980, 79, 80, 81, like when like hair bands hadn't even come in, like hair metal bands hadn't even come in yet. It would be like the old stuff. And so we were just doing cover songs. So I played drums for a long time. And the last band I was in, the last metal band I was in high school, like we were fairly popular. It was like Fractured Wing. That was
Sick.
doing
Yeah.
all the doing all the covers and stuff. And so that but at some point, new wave had kind of come in at that point, and I was really taken aback by again synths and all this stuff that it really just started to make sense to me. And then I saw Terry Bozzio of Missing Persons play live, and he had this incredible drum kit, and I was like, it was electronic, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do that. And so then I just was like, I don't want to be a drummer anymore. I just want to go. I want to be more than that. I want to compose music and do stuff. And so I quit metal, just left it behind and started doing experimental music. And I don't know how I fell in. I mean, I do know how I fell into that, but I fell into experimental music and started doing electronic music and started trying to figure that out. And so that's kind of how I got there. And then like this was in the early days when there weren't a lot of people, like, again, you talk about like 1985, 1986 in the US, especially in Texas, there weren't a lot of
Yeah.
solo
Yeah.
synthesizer dudes doing shows and stuff, or performing or doing sets like that. In the UK, it was far more popular, and maybe even on the coast. But anyway, and so I just started doing that, and like I decided I didn't want to be in those bands anymore in that way, and so I just started working on music myself and building it and kind of doing it. And I was like, okay, well, you do everything. You play the drums, you sing, everything. And then I built an electronic drum kit. Me and a friend of mine built this
Yeah.
electronic drum kit, pretty low tech, but it worked. So and just kind of did that, and then just kind of built from that, and then since we're with that afterwards, and then when in about '88, two friends of mine, one I had worked with for a long time, David Starfire, that's what he goes by now, and this other guy, Win Martin, we all joined together under. I'd already been doing Lesson 7 since '86, but by '88 we decided to do together, and I really just kind of advocated writing songs as much and became more of a just giving input and stuff because they were good songwriters and stuff. And so we just kind of worked together. I mostly sang and did that. So, sorry, long-winded story to get to that, but that's how I got there. And so I just mostly sing and produce music now. And I
Yeah.
work with a lot of producers, like even continuing today, I just work with producers, like they'll, somebody will send a song and I'm like, oh, that's a great set of beats. Let's do this to it. And we'll start, collaborating in that way, but I'm not actually touching it anymore. It's all on the computer, and
Yeah.
then I just put up the vocals. And Mark Stewart of the Pod
Yeah.
Group,
Yeah. Yeah.
he kind of, like I worked with him for the last couple of years, and it just really helped validate some of my processes because, I'm kind of isolated, and I had left the music industry for such a long time. After '92, I didn't even come back until 2017, really, and so I had left it, and so much had changed, and I was, I don't understand processes, and I wasn't steeped in the music business, and so anyway, but he just helped to validate some of the things I was coming to naturally, like working with producers and stuff like that. And so that's just kind of the process how it's evolved over the years or decades now.
Right. Mark is a fascinating guy.
Oh
Like
my gosh, he is.
his music and like where he went with it post pop group, right? And like
Yes.
I got to chat with him a while ago and he had this whole philosophy of like how life is like dub. So like to work
Yes.
with him like as a producer, I imagine those insights and especially in like a situation when you're focused on a thing would be really like what were like some of the like as far as processes and kind of like how you said it made what you were doing kind of uh, right or feel okay. Like, what were some of the insights gleamed from Mark Stewart, maybe on a
Well,
more specific level?
okay. Well, it's interesting as it because it's going to sound like really regular because you talk to musicians all day and stuff, but
Right.
I didn't. Just remember, I had to get got back up, and
Yeah.
so like where like I would get a snippet of a song from somebody, and then I was like, well, I've got to finish it with that person because they did that. I used to tell myself that,
Yeah.
but instead I can take that snippet and I can send it to multiple different people and have them build things, and we can talk about, some of them I can talk with them about building it, and other ones they just kind of go off with it, and then I can mash all those pieces together into a song, and that's a process that actually, and I'm sure, like, I mean, like a lot of big producers, like in pop music and stuff, I'm sure that's what they do because, you'll see producers and it's like 15 producers on a song,
Yeah. Yeah.
75 songwriters. I'm sure that's what they were doing. But to me, that was just outside my world. I didn't even know that. But Mark showed me, like when we were working on getting his album ready for release and stuff, this is the process he was going through. And I got to see it, like sometimes he would take tracks to Adrian and he and Adrian would take it all the way, or he would get some mix from Adrian, but then send it to some other people like this guy named Zeke, this guy in North England, and get him to finish it, or Peter Harris to actually work and add some more pieces to it. And I just liked that process. It actually is just a collage work, which is what
Yeah.
he's always done.
Right.
And like you were just talking about, Mark, one of my main inspirations for getting into industrial music was Mark Stewart and the Veneer of Democracy and those tracks in Jerusalem and stuff. When I heard those, my head exploded as a redneck kid in Texas and Dallas. I was like, "Whoa, what is this? Who's doing this?" Because I was already listening to hip hop and how they were
Right.
mashing stuff up, but this was a whole different way. And giving rise to On You Sound and Tech Head Sound System and all those variants. But anyway, but Mark was the kind of the impetus for that. So it's just interesting to see that arc and Mark just helped me kind of pull all that together.
Right. Well, that kind of goes off to the concept from the beginning of the solidarity, the working as a group, right? And like knowing that it doesn't always have to be you doing all of it, but that it grows and sounds better. And collectively, if more minds go into it, and if those guys, like the banjo player who's on this track, he's been playing banjo, he should probably play banjo on this track. You know what I mean? Like, whatever.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. I feel the same way.
That's so
And
cool.
I'm sure that David Bowie had a similar process, just not with just electronic stuff. He would
Right.
come in with a sketch of a song, and then the guys would flesh it out and make it. And that's what I find is beauty. And when I work with a good producer, like sometimes I'll bring in ideas, and that's what I think is like. Like here's my acoustic song. It's not really acoustic, but like
Yeah.
here's my little scrap of a song, and then they start to fill it out. I'm like, oh my gosh, those strings sound good. I didn't think about putting the chorus like that. Like,
Yeah.
and I love it. I truly love it.
It's so like my favorite part about sending tracks back is getting them back, or sending tracks
Yes.
out is getting them back, and then
Oh
hearing
my gosh.
what
Yes.
you know what I mean. Like it's like I would have never put
Right.
two piano layers like this one. You know what I mean? Like
Right. Exactly. And that exploration is actually drives the label a lot. Emergency Hearts, the label, because we like to do remixes a lot. Like, and I really love to send out, like one song. I don't just get a remix of it. Sometimes I'll get 10 remixes of a song from different people because I love giving the source material. Again, looking at it as just like digital detritus or digital, something that people can remake into anything that they want to. And I tell them, I'm like, we don't just need a dance mix for this, or just, do what you do with it, make it yours with these, these pieces. And it's incredible what comes back. That, and when I get it back, that feeling you're talking about is what I love. I truly, I'm like, oh my gosh, what a great interpretation you did, of that. Or like, or what a wow, so interesting that you took it in that direction. Never thought about it that way. I love it. I truly love it. A lot of the artists we work with get a little freaked out about it sometimes. They're like, well, I didn't ever think a metal band would be able to remix my ambient song, but sure.
that's odd. Like that. It's there's nothing like that. One thing I kind of wanted to touch base on further back is so when you're like around like. Meeting some of these country like legends, right? And
Hmm.
as a drummer in a country band, your main goal is every musician in a country outfit. His main goal is like to serve the song, right? Is like the
That's right.
drummer's
That's
not
right.
flashy. They're in the pocket. They're doing that train beat. You know what I mean? They're not
Right.
really
Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
And like so like I mean, did you ever cross George Jones or any of those guys as a kid?
All the time.
Yeah?
I mean, I thought they were my family because I
Yeah?
didn't understand it. Like I thought George and all the guys in the Jones Boys were my uncles. Like I truly didn't know because I mean they were at my grandmother's house and stuff. This is not like they
Yeah?
were like I just saw them occasionally. Like I saw them all the time. Like they
Wow.
parked like they parked the bus at my grandmother's trailer. Like often. Because George and my dad are from the same small town outside of Beaumont, Texas. And so that's where that connection comes from. And so, and then when I would meet people, like all the time, I mean, like Johnny Cash, Ronnie Millsap, the Statler brothers, fuck, Alabama. I mean, I can't even think of like there's some I never met, like Loretta Lynn, but I mean Dolly Parton,
Yeah.
Porter Wagner. I mean, I don't know. That list is really long because that was like we went to a lot of shows and
Right.
stuff. But I was just a kid, and like I would just stand behind the drums while my dad played, all the time, and he did. I mean, like what you were talking about, it was like very simple beats and stuff. But he never was a flash drummer anyway.
Right.
That even when he wasn't doing that. And so, and country music was way different than, like George wasn't legendary. He was legendary for being an alcoholic then.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he wasn't legendary for he wasn't a legend yet, and
Right.
neither was Tammy. They're and they and it's interesting because even though they were kind of Nashville country, the band was very much like outlaw country, like
Mm.
like even though if you
Yeah.
look at pictures of the Jones Boys in the '60s, all super clean cut. Everybody's got like flat tops and stuff. But by the time the '70s, man, they all look like damn hippies. They could have been in Creedence Clearwater, some of them if
Yeah.
they weren't still holding on to it. And so it was always kind of an interesting tension in that, and then they all did a lot of drugs and stuff that I saw and took as regular too. But yeah, so yeah, he did keep a real simple beat, like, and it was interesting to watch that kind of drumming and learn that kind of drum. And my dad played jazz style, so he was like his
The
he
grip.
had his
Yeah.
yeah, the grip. He had the side grip, and he taught me to play that way. But I went to two fisted
Yeah.
action, so I could play heavy metal bands,
Hell
you know.
yeah. Well, like, so being around that, like, what were some of, like, did anyone ever, like, was there any, like, maybe unintentional, like, music nuggets of wisdom that you still follow today? Just like someone muttered something that really kind of like stayed the path that you find that you still kind of resonate with? Maybe it's like, even if it was like, don't do this many drugs, because it sounds like there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
But, like,
No,
no?
no. Yeah,
Okay.
us as kids, we were just appendages to
Yeah.
them. You know what I mean? Like they had
Okay,
their
okay.
big adult lives and stuff, going on. I wish. Oh my gosh, wouldn't it be so magical if I could tell you this like story of like
Right. Yeah, I
how
was
it all
kind
changed?
of like, but
No,
but that,
no. Pretty much the whole thing that happened was I just learned that I did not want to be my dad when I grew up. That's
right.
all I learned from all that. I wanted to be a better drummer, and that's the only thing I knew
But,
because he was a sad, miserable, angry person.
right.
You
Well,
know, I mean, so I learned that, but he didn't tell me that. The beatings told me that.
right. Yeah.
So
But like, that's it equally as valuable of a lesson, like, because like it sounds like, that's an incredible like group of people to be around to until you really like zone into like the minutia and like the shitty stuff that's around it. And like, I don't, a lot of people are rose tinted when it becomes like someone they're artistically moved by, you know. And like, it's kind of like with the Doors, like Jim Morrison's great, but I would not want to have to make sure he got to the gig. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
exactly, right. But all these guys were like that, right? Exact to
yeah,
degrees, like, and it
jeez,
mostly was men, and the
yeah,
women were kind of, side appendages. Also, our moms were, appendages to them and stuff. And but it, but they had a lot of camaraderie too. Maybe I learned that. You're making me think about it. Like all, not just the Jones Boys, but amongst all because there was like touring circuits back then.
yeah,
So it'd be like reviews. So like it'd be the same shows like with Ronnie Millsap and Tanya Tucker and people like in the same bill, like for like 10 dates in a row or whatever it was, big shows, not even little shows and stuff, but they were reviews. So they were like traveling caravans of people. So I saw the same people again and again a lot, and it was I did see a lot of camaraderie and a lot of friendship. I don't remember any petty backbiting or anything. Of course, might not have seen it. And everybody was really nice to the kids. Either we were ignored or they were really nice to us. Nobody was like pushing us around or anything. And I hung out with Georgette Jones, which was George and Tammy's only daughter.
yeah.
For a long time, we were kids for a long time. I was like, "Are we cousins?" and things, like 'cause so. And it was like,
But that's
grew up to find out that wasn't true.
do you still stay in touch, or is
With
that
who?
like with any of that, like those non-cousins? You know what I mean? Like,
No,
yeah,
I tried to reach out to Georgette. through early days of corporate social media,
Yeah.
but it didn't ever go anywhere, and that was fine. I didn't
Yeah.
care that much. I was, like I have photos of us together and stuff. I was like, hey, maybe you might want some of these photos or something. It was not that big a deal. And then the band, the old band, who the guys I used to think were my uncles, I reached out to two of them uh, about 2 years ago. So if I could just back up, I didn't see my dad for almost 30 years, and 20 of those years he was in prison. And he
Damn.
wasn't
Yeah.
looking for me. He
Yeah.
and he wasn't and he wasn't my biological dad. And so it was like he just raised me for 10 years at this very crucial time in my life from
Right.
3 to 13. And so again, this is like sorting later. I didn't understand it at the time. And so I found him again outside of Beaumont in 2012, living with his brother in the same trailer my grandmother was, except she was dead, had been dead for 20 something years. And anyway, I saw him this one time, and it wasn't like a hallmark moment. It didn't hurt my
Yeah.
feelings, or I wasn't sad about it. I found it super surreal and amazing to really find him again, because I'd wanted to find him because he lived off the grid basically.
Right. Right.
And so, anyway, I reached out to him. Anyway, he died in the interceding years. Him and my uncle both
Mhm.
died on the property. They'd lived, basically lived there all their lives, 70 something years. And so I reached out to a couple of I tried to track down some of the old Jones Boys guys, because some of them lived down the street from us. Like, that's how close those guys were. I've never talked about this stuff with anybody really, except for maybe my wife. But it's so I reached out to James Hawley, who was the bass player, and Charlie Carter, who was the longtime guitarist. And Charlie Carter. So what happened was that they were all Jones boys from the '60s into the '70s, and then Tammy and George married sometime in like the late '60s and '70s, but they had a bitter divorce. And when George was so messed up by '76 or '75, so far out of it, they all left and joined Tammy's band and stayed in her band and my dad left in 1980. But then Charlie and James stayed on for another. Like Charlie stayed on until I think the '90s. He was still the guitarist for her band, and then until she died. And so when I reached out to him, I mean, this is somebody that used to adore me, and he said he did, he was glad to talk to me, but he didn't want to talk about the music business at all.
Yeah.
He said I turned my back on it. He was living in Mesquite, Texas, and he was like, have nothing to do with it. And he was like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. And I was like, man, it was like, are you okay? And it's like, he's good. I'm just an old man now, and I just have a different life. And he's like, I just don't care. I mean, you talk about somebody who's a musician, a side musician for 35, 37 years. And he's just like, nah, don't even want to talk about it at all. Not about
Yeah.
even bragging about it. He just
Yeah.
like, he was very adamant. But then I reached out to James Hawley, who was a bass player, and I grew up with his kids, literally down the street from me. And he was different, and these guys are both like, these guys are like 78, 80, 81, like in that range. And this is just before COVID. And he and I had made plans to get together, and he was living out in East Texas. And I just haven't reached out to him since then because COVID happened. But he was really glad to hear from me, and he wanted to. It was nice to connect because part of me, it's a journey of trying to find a sense of place of who I am, and again, just trying to make sense of the world. Like who, even though they weren't going to tell me stories or anything, it wasn't about that. I just wanted to talk to them about their lives, and in turn, that would help me, understand more about my own life, not like in a therapeutic way, in a very much of a curiosity way.
Right. 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 Which, well, one, I appreciate you sharing that with me. That's but like that, to kind of just even know like these people that, like, as a kid, like like how you're saying that these older people, are they uncles, or they what, they're just here all the time. So like, even just to
Yeah,
check in, like checking in
yeah,
is more therapeutic than it may not even attempting to be, but it just to know someone's okay, and that they's like, I remember you, like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah.
even if you completely avoid talking about the music industry, because I'm sure homie was burnt out from that. Like,
Oh my God, I'm sure,
yeah,
I'm
like,
sure, I'm sure, I'm sure drugs, like he was
yeah,
just
oh my
recovered from
God,
drugs, all of it,
yeah.
because
Well,
was probably, because even though you always see, the depictions you used to, always like rock stars tearing up hotels and
yeah.
stuff, but it was country guys were doing it too. You just did driving cars into pools, taking lots of drugs, like they were all doing it.
Yeah. And like that sucks because it takes away from the thing that you love them for. Maybe it's maybe some people thrive on that's how they came up with it. But I think in the big picture, you lose that magic from all that madness. Um,
Oh yeah.
and like,
When I saw my dad last in that 2012 thing, he was living on this property and he had this warehouse that used to be my uncle's studio that he worked out of. He was doing welding and stuff.
yeah,
And I went in there and I saw his old drum kit in there, one of his old
yeah,
drum kits, and it was just thrown aside. I was like, "When did you play drums last?" And he was like,
yeah.
"Well, I was in prison. I was in the prison band, and that
Damn,
was it." Yeah.
damn. Yeah,
It's interesting because, well, okay, just to tie that story in, because you're making me think about it, is that I used to go as a child
yeah,
to the Huntsville State Prison
yeah.
rodeo every year because my dad played at it
Huh.
and when it was, George Jones and Tammy Wynette played there. So every year for, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, we went there. It was a regular circuit, and it was weird to think my dad was in that prison later.
Yeah, what a weird twist of faith. Holy shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, but you like
So
to kind of have those experiences of like, uh, these are people in here, and like we get to brighten their lives for an hour or whatever, and see that as a kid, that kind of like really like makes sense of some of this amazing work you're doing now. Like to
I
grow
think
up
it
and
totally informs it. You're very astute. That it totally informs it because not only like prisons were always interesting to me because like having been in them
yeah,
as a child without knowing anybody that was in them at the time. Then later, growing up and as a teenager and as an adult, my cousins and my uncles all going to prison or jail for drugs and drug related stuff, and then of course my dad also going to jail, going to prison for drugs twice.
yeah,
And so it definitely, I say drugs and prison and poverty definitely informed many things that have carried into my life. And like, I'm not saying that I spun off in drug world, or I went to prison or anything, but I'm just saying all those being around me,
right,
all my
right.
life.
You can't
So
not be in like molded by that because it's like, and to some degrees it's so traumatic in a way, but and also is it's so aggravating to see like how some of these systems are put in place but they don't help anyone at one point,
yes,
and
agreed,
then
agreed on both fronts, the
right,
interpersonal and the political, and what you're talking about. Absolutely, absolutely. And it's one of the themes I've worked on is prisoner issues for almost 30 years, not related to my dad because I didn't care about him or what
yeah,
he was doing, even though I knew he was locked up, but just working on prison and political prisoner issues in the United States. I've worked on those issues for 27, almost 30 years, at various things. I worked on a campaign for 20 years on one campaign, with these political prisoners. So I'm just saying that, like, yeah, it definitely has informed all, like, something that's carried through in my life, not in trauma, but just definitely having the openness to that's real
yeah,
in the world,
right, right. Well, just even to realize these are everyone comes from something, right, and something happened,
right.
and like, and then when you're here and like what's this doing besides just turning the mill and keeping this prison light on, you know what I mean? Like, are we really
Exactly. Right.
shaping people?
Exactly.
Are we banning people? Are we canceling people?
Both.
Like, and that's I
And
mean,
warehousing them, and also
right,
just warehousing because we
right.
don't know what else to do with them, you
And
know
like, yeah, so I think that's incredible that to be around that situation and be like, I want to help aid this in some way as opposed to like just getting away from it. And I think that speaks highly of your character. And like that comes through all the art and all the books you've written and like the activist work that you do. And like it's really interesting to hear like how it comes like from all these like early experiences, like musically and like how like it's so intertwined. And one thing, like I guess just from a musical perspective, right, with country music, there's the emphasis on the song and the lyrics and how where this narrative is being what narrative is being
exactly.
presented
Yes.
and how you can support that. Now applying that to like electronic music, and like finding samples is, in my mind, is like you're looking for a rhythmic phrase that has something to say. And like a drummer is, I think, musically probably one of the most adept to hearing that impact of like rhythmically what's being said like in a sample, and like coming from this background of serving the song, like the importance of what's being said. And like going through this new record and the demos that you have out, like there's definitely you hone in on that with a lot of these samples. Like, is that something like, do you think coming from this background informed that? Do you or was this something that was like trying to go the opposite? Like,
No, I think you're right. I think that you're onto very much with that. That's a very interesting. I hadn't thought about samples in that way, but it truly is. But I have also been somebody who's paid attention to media all my life. As a child, was watching the news and stuff, and so when sampling started to come around in the early to mid '80s, like more widespread where everybody could do it, I was taken aback by the way that samples could help tell the story, which is, I think, is what you're talking about. Also, within, like, in choosing those, some of those were like, this phrase from this movie or this part of this speech help us to say the things that we want to say in this song without having to just sing it ourselves and stuff. And I definitely looked at that, and I love that cut up culture. Again, coming back to
yeah,
Mark Stewart and dub in general, but Mark Stewart, like, and really what Anu and people like that were doing, where they're really cutting stuff up, I think is absolutely there. But I always had a tension for me when I was doing electronic and industrial and dark wave music, because I wanted it to be more melodic sometimes. I wanted it to have feeling and stuff, not just the driving rhythms of it. So lesson seven at that phase of it, like this on continuum of time, is that tension between that. Like let's have moving cut up songs that have driving beats, but also let's have these like melodic songs that are, like that evoke. Maybe they're not as overtly political, although like everything is political. When I go back to all my writing, which I've never stopped for 30 something years, it's always political. I'm like, why was I writing this? Even like sometimes I don't even remember how did I get on this theme? And thematically, interestingly enough, a lot of my stuff is about the media, if it's not just poetic, like license that I'm taking for things and singing about something. Because I like to sing, I like play on words, and I like Dada approaches to stuff, and I like approaching lyrics to that, or words or poetry or things like. But I also like constructing narratives that can convey feelings, or convey importance about issues and stuff without fucking trying to hit people over the head all the time. So I like the tension between those two. Anyway, and so lesson seven was that's what that era of it was, definitely that tension of that. So that's where this are reflected in the songs, I guess I'd say.
wow. Like that's an like to that that's like a beautiful balance of like hitting the hammer on the nail and like finding a way to make it like open to interpretation. And like I think that's like the goal of a good writer is, how do I say something that hits home but also can be like felt in a way that isn't. You know what I mean? Like,
That's right. That's right.
um
Exactly. Exactly. Because I appreciate both approaches, right?
right.
But like when I was exposed to punk music and many of, like, it didn't resonate as much because it was like the nail on the head. Like,
Right.
Reagan's bad. This is bad. Like, I fucking
Yeah.
hated Reagan.
Yeah.
And he's gonna kill us. I hated Thatcher. Like, just know that. Like, but it didn't. But I was like, it didn't appeal to me as much. It appealed to some of my angst of my youth because I was fucking angry about stuff, at points as a teenager. But then later, like a song like VIM did Maggie's Party, which was a house song that took samples from Margaret Thatcher's speeches and cut them up and still kind of did the same thing. Still made her look like a shit bag, but also without saying you're a shit bag.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
and like Gary Kelly on Tackhead did the same thing where they sampled her in the Hard Left song. The decades ago, like, and just I love those reappropriations at the same time. But both of them are examples where they are not hit nail on the head, just a little gray, a little artistic license, but you understand what it means. The sentiment's still there. Yeah, I think that's clever.
That's
I'm not that clever, so
but one well kind of like it's interesting too to write music like this, and like when you take samples you're like it's kind of like I don't think people don't realize it's just like the inspiration like sponge you have to have for like a any songwriter, right? Like Dylan here's blowing
right,
in the wind, that's a song, right?
right,
Phrase catching or song seed planting, you hear little bits,
right.
and
Yes,
sampling is 100% that, but you're going to these different forms of, I mean, I'm sure everyone who's inspired finds themselves somewhere inspired by any form of media, but in particular you can take it
absolutely.
and you can chop it and like, but you have to have that open like perception and like,
Right, right.
but
We were early crate diggers, man. We were
yeah.
like, we all, like, all of us worked at record stores. So we were like, oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh, we'll take that. We'll take that. Like, yeah, imports, all kinds of things of, obscure stuff, especially when international music was first starting to come in. And one of the projects that I worked with a lot, it wasn't my band, but it was some good friends of mine. It was called International Thief Thief. And they were
Oh, that's cool.
amazing,
Yeah.
amazing at cutting and sampling just at the time super obscure like African and just international music, Indonesian stuff, like things that just never was in the US, but everybody was crate diggers. We all had giant vinyl collections for a while.
On one sample that stuck out to me on this Advance was the ninth track, the first sample. It's an older gentleman saying how he like was inspired to see someone to die, be in one.
Yeah,
Now I know that, but I don't know what that's from. Like I know it's from a
I
documentary.
don't know what it's from
Yeah.
either.
Okay.
I can't remember. I'd have to ask when. He told me years ago, but
Yeah.
I can't remember. It's been far, 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 far too long. But it's from a documentary about veterans who were coming back, and it was like the kind of the first time when people were talking about horrible war things that were happening. And maybe it was like a BBC documentary or something, and they were talking about things like helping each other die, which these guys were, in the 80s, these guys would have been like Korean War,
Right.
World War II guys talking about it. It wasn't like Vietnam guys talking about it. And that guy, I can't even remember where that sample, which clip that sample came from, but that sample is powerful to
It
me.
is.
It always was. That's why we left it in.
That like as soon as I knew I heard that from Sarah, but I think that definitely
Yeah.
really brought out that piece. Another question I kind of like, so writing music like this with this open sponge and kind of taking in samples and writing lyrics and like writing novels and books. Like, do you have like a routine? Do you have a writing routine that you go to? Like,
Oh, fuck no.
no.
Oh my gosh, I'm a terrible writer. Like I'm not like real, like I don't even consider myself a real writer. Look at this. Like, even though you're like, yeah, you've done these things, like, but really all of these things are just forms of expression that have taken different media, outputs, but I don't consider myself I consider them the forms of communication first more than craft. Like I consider myself a musician to degrees. I consider myself a writer to degrees, but but there are writers, I'm air quoting, who I think who definitely have this process, and they write and they write and they write. But I'm not, I like like a book can take me 5 years to do. Uh, so I don't have a tendency to not work on them. Like I'm not somebody who sits solitary and writes every day. That's why I know I'm not a writer, because the writers I know, that's what they do. They don't go to parties. They don't go see people. They don't go to art openings. They don't run galleries. They like, I write books or I write stories or or I'm a journalist. That's just not me. And so what I do is I just squeeze it in between stuff, like, oh, I'm inspired to write this for right now. But I kind of stopped doing books. I have about 6 of them in different various stages of completion, but I kind of stopped doing them because I wanted to go back to music, because I started to feel like I could tell some of the same things, or I could share some of the same feelings I was having and challenging myself to say it in a 5-minute song or less. Like, how do I compact this instead of a 2,000 word intro that just starts the essay that's going to be 10,000 words for an essay?
Yeah.
What if I just say it in 150 words in a song? What is it? How do I convey that? And it helps me to think about things in compact ways. And so I've just enjoyed that process of late, kind of doing this as instead of just sitting, because books, like I can sit down and literally write 2 or 3 thousand words in a sitting, but then I know that book is not going to see the light of day for 5 years or 6 years
Right.
or years. It just takes a long time to
Right.
do them.
And just as the person reading it, it takes longer. You know what I mean? Compared to
Sure,
compared
sure,
to
yes.
3 minutes, maybe
Yeah,
a couple
exactly. You're like,
lessons.
oh my gosh, I just felt that. Like, or
Yeah.
like, or like, I understand what they're saying about that. Like, I agree, or
Yeah.
whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I'm motivated too. You know?
But I think it's so awesome that you do both because those are two different practices and they hit two different people and that inspiration is still there in either way. Some people like when you read a book, you're hyped up for way longer than maybe a lifetime, compared to a song, which I think you
I don't know, but a good song though that
yep, that's
resonates
true.
with you,
That's
you're
true.
still listening to it years and decades later. You're like, oh my god, that song still moves me
Yeah, I'm taking
sometimes.
that back.
Yeah, it's so true. So I just like both of
Yeah.
those, but at the same time, I always like writing has always been a thing. Like it's always been a it vomits out of me, in periods of time, poetry and prose and short stories and things. And I think that for me, partly the rise of corporate social media, starting around 2008 or nine, really took the wind out of my sails for writing. And I saw it with a lot of other writers because you're writing posts all day, like, so you're just writing content. But instead I was like, well, why would I want to do that? I'd rather just put that into a book rather
Right.
than wasting it, on a fucking 2,000 likes. It doesn't matter. The book will fucking reach way more people than that. And
Right.
so I began to make conscious decisions about kind of those kind of things. And then some of the stuff needs to, like, like books make more sense because they're longer conceptual things, or longer essays also make sense because there's much more that needs to be said about this particular idea or set of ideas or experiences, at least from my perspective, that can't be reached in a small song. And actually, this is what crosses over with the label because we're going to produce books also. We are producing books, so we already have our first book out, which is it actually is a collage of like, it's my writing, a fictional story, a photographer who's known in his photographer world, images. So it's like text on one side, image on the other side. But we also put a 7-inch picture disc in of one of my songs in there that's also related to the same theme. So this is the beginning. This is the embryonic genesis, I guess, of where Emergency Hearts will go. And like next year, I'm doing Mark Spivey of Dead Voices on Air and Download. We've been editing it this year. We're going to try to release his memoir next year. And so my idea is to have books and visual art because I think a lot of artists they express themselves more than just songs or just more than just lyrics. And so I want to give some space for that. And I'm much more interested in selling, if we're going to sell things, selling objects from people like books or prints or their paintings or whatever it is, or whatever they're making that's art, more than selling a record, like, because we can digitally release stuff, but we can sell these other things to people who are the people, can share these things that are interesting, that makes it more multidimensional than just like, I'm just a musician. I always thought that was limiting for people. Like, I'm just a musician. I'm like, are you just a musician though? It's
Yeah.
like, I see all these paintings in your house, you know?
That's so cool though. That kind of goes back to that collaborative effort and like a collaborative vision.
Absolutely.
That's so, like
Yeah.
that's so cool to be able to do this with Emergency Hearts, like, and to have
Right,
all
and that's
these.
the only people we work with are. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on
No,
you,
no,
but I
no.
was like,
It's
I'll just say that, like, that's the only people we work with. If you're not a collaborative person, there's nothing that we need from you. Like, if you're like a rising artist or something like that, or if you're an established, because we work with a lot of silver hair people too, that are established, they're mid-career and late career artists. Like, if we do that and you're an asshole, I won't work with you because we just don't need to.
yeah,
I like, because everybody we work with, Mark Stewart and Mark Spivey, I was telling you about, and this
yeah,
woman signed, her name is Rona Rougeheart. I mean, these people all collaborate across things, not just musically, but just even helping each other in the label and in the ecosystems and stuff. And I just like it. It's just a friendly approach to it.
That's so like,
especially with the
yeah,
collapse of the culture industry, because
right, right.
music, it's become so valueless and so many, it's just content for corporate platforms, and so not I don't look at it like that, like we value it more than that, but I'm saying that's what
In
it's
the big
become. I
scheme,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, and so I want people to think about, like not just that you're just limited to this. Like, why don't we just why don't you create some other stuff, since it's art, partially for joy and partially to continue to live by making money in the capitalist system.
Right.
So
But I think that's like so much of it, it's like what the fuck's an NFT? You know what I mean? Like why like
yeah,
it's so
exactly.
cool to have like a physical like records came back because they're physical and you like what the sound wave is visible. Like you can see it. You're that's what you're hearing,
Right,
you know?
right.
That's the biggest form of a song you could probably get before you see the band. And like
Exactly. It used to be for sure. But you
right.
know what? I mean, I read in the industry, sadly, I read industry magazines about this stuff. And literally 99% of the people that buy vinyl and CDs do not listen to them anymore.
Yeah.
They're
It's
just
just
buying
on
it
the
as an
shelf.
object.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, why would I want to just make vinyl then as a record company? Because some people said, yes, that's the thing. But I'm like, well, man, wouldn't it be cooler to have all these like patches that or this puzzle that Mark Stewart made?
Yeah.
Like
Hell
it
yes.
would just be it's just a cooler thing. Like, I mean, where are you going to get that?
Yeah.
So anyway, and the music is still there because we're still releasing it. It's still, it's in the digital realm, which is where it's all at, where the hopefully the real money is. I hate to keep talking about money, but that's a real thing in running a business, is trying to keep it going. It's definitely it's definitely hobby-ish to degrees, because I'm not trying to kill myself, and I don't think we're going to sell this thing to Apple anytime soon, for $1 billion. So I'm like, well, how do we make it sustainable economically too? Because one of running a label like the way we run it is super ethical. So there's 6 employees, they all get paid well, to do things. So that we need to create funds to do that. And a lot of indie labels don't care about that. It's just one person operation, or it's just an artist that releases their own stuff, and but we're really actually trying to make something a little bit bigger that matters more than just content.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, I
So
think that comes off because I've talked to a few artists on your label so far. Like, and like I think that resonates through each individual artist on it, and like the idea of taking this and making like a just like how you said a book, a visual with a song. Like that's the coolest. Like that's it's a few steps away from a film. You know what I mean? Like
it is. Well, I mean, we're doing films
yeah,
too. I mean, why
sick.
not?
Yeah,
So, like,
that's
I mean, why not? We do have art films, so that's the other thing, is we release a lot of vintage art films. I just haven't. It hasn't happened yet. This year is the year of the launch of a lot more things, in the podcast and stuff like that. It's just steps. And just in the history of the label, just if I could backtrack for half a second, I kind of started messing around in 2017 and releasing stuff, and by 2019 I got a little more serious, and an old friend of mine and I reconnected. His name was David May, and he was a longtime electronic musician. We'd worked together, done shows together back in the day, and reconnected. And he was a producer and stuff. We worked together on a lot of stuff, but he died tragically in a fire in October of 2020, and it just knocked the wind out of me. Just totally knocked the wind out of me. And so it took me a while to figure out what I was going to do. And during that time, Mark Stewart reached out to me, and that's when we started talking, started working together on stuff, and he gave me a lot of support in that. And I started working with this guy Mark Pistol from Consolidated, who was an old friend. We started working together, and so between those two people, they really kind of helped me just kind of keep it going. They're like, yeah, it's worth keeping it going. This is a small thing, but it's worth keeping going. So we kept it going,
That's awesome. And like
and so that's where we're
what a
at.
team supreme. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I
what a team
know.
supreme. That's like if you're gonna get support. No. Like
Yeah,
that's so cool. And well I think you're doing it, and I think like just from a person that's gotten to talk to who you're working with, like it's definitely a team supreme. And it's awesome that it's based on like genuine people who are passionate about art and passionate about expression and passionate about sharing those in the way that matters, and not
that's
just
right. That's
not
right.
just like putting all their money on an ad so you can click on it and making nonsense content, but making stuff that's
Exactly.
serious.
Exactly. Right. Right.
One thing
And
sorry.
go ahead. And I mean, go ahead.
No, it's good because I was gonna before I
I was
really
just going to say, when so I get to work with people like Consolidated. I mean, they're on my label now. They've been
yeah
on my label for the last couple of years because Mark Pistol is Consolidated, and he's also Murky. Hercules and Love Affair, and also he was in Meat Beat Manifesto for a long time. And so it's just like Consolidated is used to epitomize to me one of the most overt political ways to do stuff that I actually enjoyed, you know. And I was friends with those guys. You know, we did multiple shows with them back in the 80s and the early 90s. And then later, Adam and I were friends through the political stuff. And it was just a good crossover because when I was touring, doing book stuff between 2012 and 2016, he, you know, he'd come out in Portland, he'd come out to the shows and we'd talk and stuff. And I hung out with him, watch soccer games and stuff. And it was really good. And it was just a good build, again, just building on relationships and building on old friendships and stuff. It just makes it more comfortable than than being all business
Right.
or all, you know, desperate.
Well,
So
and yeah, to be able to celebrate that in a more professional kind of way, where you're like, it isn't just all money, you know, but it's also like celebrating that creative expression with someone you've started with. You know what I mean? Like, or
that's
you
right.
know,
That's
went on
right.
the journey
Right.
with. Um,
Exactly. You know,
that's so awesome. Like what I wanted to, what we have to talk about some Cleveland stuff a little bit. Like we gotta mention the guide to culture stuff we talked about at the top.
oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so kind of on the concept of a book and releasing books, like how did you come in contact with R.A. Washington and like how did that book come about? The interview book.
Uh, oh, the interview book. Let's see. I had a book come out in 2012 called Black Flags and Windmills, and it did pretty good.
Yeah.
Very funny. It would have been on the New York Times bestseller list had the publisher I had done it with cared about trying to promote that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
very interesting because by numbers, it did really good, and so it resonated with people. I'm not even. This is not even like toot my own horn
Yeah.
because it was kind of a surprise that it happened. And so I toured on that book. You know, a lot of people tour on a book for a few months or a few weeks or something like that. I toured on that book for almost 5 years because it resonated so much in helping build capacity and changing ideas around disasters and what people do after disasters, that it just resonated. And so I came through Guide to Culture in Cleveland uh, twice to speak, and that's where I met RA because he was working with a lot of anarchist kids who were doing like prisoner support stuff. And anyway, they brought me twice, and we just all hit it off really good. And they had right at that point were starting to do a small publishing arm. They had bought the machines and or gotten grants for the machines. Somehow they were gonna self-publish, you know, like you'd start making books and stuff. Because you know, RA is a writer and
Right.
he's written tons and tons and tons and tons and tons. And he's a real writer. He's also one of those people I go, that's a writer. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
we just hit it off. And so they wanted to do a book with me. And so I was already in the works for another book. So I was like, but I said, this is a concept I'd be interested in. So they thought it would be good. And so we just turned, it was a collection of interviews and talks, but it wasn't just straight. Like I fleshed them out. Like it wasn't just like, you know, I would take like a conversation that we're having, maybe I'd transcribe it, and then I would take things and start expanding on it. You know, go like, oh, I only said 2 lines here, but I might say like a whole paragraph or 2 paragraphs to flesh out the idea, cut out the, you know, the ums and the ahs and stuff like that, and just make it in interview format, but
Yeah.
make it read as a book. And so I thought it was a great concept, and so we just did it, and it did good. It was, I think that's the book sold like 3,000 copies within a couple of years. It's been out of print for a few years, and I think that they closed the publishing house after that. So, and I haven't been in touch with the RA or anything, but then I started working with Emergency Hearts, and I was working with the guys from one of the guys from Algiers, actually two of the guys from Algiers. They were doing a side project with Mark Stewart called Nun Gun. And they wanted to get Adrian Sherwood to do a remix for them, and I said I would if you would release this dub album on my label. They released another version through Matador, the label that Algiers is on, and I said if you'll release the dub version through me, you know, and you guys still have control and all that stuff, they'll do it. And they did it on Mark's word, and that was very cool. And so, but when I got the material, I started looking at this stuff, and it was like, Morning a Black Star, and I was like, what the heck is this? I was like, oh my gosh, these mixes are incredible. And so anyway, I looked them up and I started listening to their music, and then I looked at it. It was R.A. Washington. He's part of that project. And I was like, this is so beautiful. What a great circle. And I haven't reached out. Funny enough, I haven't reached out to him to tell him that, but it's just an interesting crossover in my life, and I like that. And and I have this special thing too of like Cleveland, because I toured with Skinny Puppy. My Lesson Seven toured with Skinny Puppy in 1988 on the Vivisect Six tour. Which when you were asking about like country music, is there a thing that was like super influential? Somebody said, but no. But in 1988, when we toured with Skinny Puppy, they were very influential to me. I became vegan and vegetarian right after that for the next 35 years. I fought for animal rights and stuff because that's what that tour was about. But that we only did like 5 dates. It was like Chicago, Minneapolis, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, something else, maybe Tulsa or something. Anyway, just interesting. But it was the first time I'd ever seen the collapse in the United States, because in the South it was all farmland that got turned into factories in the more recent times. That would be in the 70s and the 80s and the 60s. But this is, I got to see where like Detroit was collapsed and totally broken. There was nothing there anymore. But Cleveland and Cincinnati, I'd never seen industrial cities that had largely just gone away. And they look like Beirut to me, or what I would see on the news and stuff. And so that was something that had a profound effect on me also. And that tour, and those shows had effect because it was either Cleveland or Cincinnati where Kevin Key and Nivek Ogre got arrested for having this fake puppet dog that some Christians said was real, and they were hurting animals.
Yeah.
And so they came, and while we were all like getting super high in a fucking illegal state back then, they arrested both of them and took all our weed. So at the time, and so
Well, also,
so those are kind of a profound experience that I just carried forward with me, and like animal rights, prison issues, and environmental stuff, and women's access to abortion have become issues that are in women's issues in general. I wouldn't say I'm a feminist or not feminist. I don't know about that, but but those women's issues in general. Those are like 4 themes that have just kind of came right out of that tour.
That's incredible. Like, was 9 Inch Nails? They're Cleveland based too. Were they on that tour as well? Okay.
They weren't. No, they
Okay, that was another thing.
I don't even know if they were around. I don't even know if they were around yet then. No, they were, because what happened was we did these dates and we left off after Cincinnati, I think, and then there was going to be 7 or 10 days, and there was going to be a Washington D.C. gig, and then there was going to be New York, like on Halloween or something. I may be confusing the other part because I'd never have gone back to look. But anyway, we were given the choice to do that show, but we didn't do the show, and that's the show that 9 Inch Nails did their first date with them and got a record deal with TBT Records immediately.
God.
So, but we were friends with them. Like we were becoming friends with it. It was okay. Like in hindsight, I mean, the arc of life is long. Like I never would have created we never would have done as good as Trent Reznor's done. I'm going to say that. Like, but at the time I was like, oh man, we could have got that record deal and stuff, but we would have burned out and gone on or something. Who knows? You know what I mean? But like, I'm like happy that they got the record deal, and it wasn't even between us or them. I'm just saying, like in my head it was.
Yeah.
But that was a pivotal time for them also. But we became friends with 9 Inch Nails at that time, with Trent and with his manager for a long time, John Malm. And Trent was going to produce a record for us. This is before Pretty Hate Machine had come out or even was doing anything yet. And then that ended up leading to us being on tour with them in 1990. And then later, Chris Vrenna, the drummer, maybe 91, had quit for a while because Trent was pretty overwhelming, and so Chris Vrenna came and lived in Dallas for a while, and he drummed with us when we opened for Clan of Zymox.
Sick.
In 91. So, but anyways, just Cleveland crossover. I always think about when I see Reznor air conditioners and heaters. I always think about Trent.
That's awesome.
And his family.
Was it? That's so cool. That's especially with I got some of RA's books, and I'm gonna look up. I'm gonna try to find a copy of the one you guys did.
It's Emergency Hearts Molotov Dreams. It shows up every once in a while on Amazon, but it shows up for like $200, and I'm like, why is that $200? I don't understand that. It's just confusing to me.
It's funny because there's only one that pops up. That's what I've noticed with Amazon. They jack it up if it's like a copy of something.
Right,
Um,
right. And we're going to reissue that book anyway, not with RA, but I'm doing a new edition of it, a second edition that's going to be expanded because I think it's only interviews
yeah,
2010 to 2015 or something.
yeah,
But
that's
the
sick.
next one it'll be like 10 or 12 years. It'll be a lot longer, covering more themes. So,
Very cool.
and then I
When
want to do the same with a music one. Hopefully, using interviews like this in the future, I'd like to put together another book just on talking about music.
sick, by all means, please.
All
Uh,
right.
like but I was gonna say it's interesting because those kids that were with him in that store, I in high school, I did food not bombs with a lot of those kids.
Oh yeah, that's exactly
Yeah,
exactly.
and
Yes, it's
sorry, to me that was like a really profound like because I went on a tour in high school with this band State Radio, and we would
uh-huh,
do
uh-huh.
service projects, right? And I
Yeah.
was a part of their nonprofit, and that's what I was doing on the tour was like assisting with that and just helping gauge these service projects and like do them, and like it was life changing. And then finding Food Not Bombs in Cleveland and being able to do that like every other week or whatever was their schedule, and like know that Panera's throwing all this away and we can just
I
compete with
know,
them.
right?
Like
Right. Yeah.
it's so
Food
cool.
not bombs.
Right, right. And like
Yeah, it still goes on. I know people still do it in Cleveland. I
yeah,
have a friend, Sanseer Shakur, who was part of the Guide to Culture. Also, he lives in some housing project there, but he does food not bombs with a bunch of anarchist kids. He's an older black man about my age, but he does it with them, and in his where he lives in that housing area where he lives, they do it every week. Every week, they're still doing it. So, and I think it's a lot of those kids from Guide to Culture. So I wonder if it's so interesting. I love it. I mean, I love it when I hear about like from an anarchist perspective. I love when I hear autonomous projects that go on
right.
just based on ideas for a long time. You
And
know?
yeah, and that's so important, and that's what continues, and that's what continues to inspire and question. And like I think
Right.
with everything you've done, my friend, I think you continue that in all aspects of your work. And Scott, I really appreciate our time, and I really appreciate getting to chat with you. This was very insightful and very inspiring. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for asking really good questions and having an engaging conversation. I really appreciate it. I've been interviewed hundreds of times, and this is one of my favorite ones to ever talk about the cross of ideas. I'm not even lying.
Well, that means the
Uh,
world. Thank you, man.
yeah, man.
Um,
Thank you for having me on.
anytime, anytime.